And I would like to introduce our speaker, Ms. Bui Thi Ha, who is the Vice Director and Head of Policy and Legislation Department at ENV Vietnam, which is a NGO, a local NGO there. And she has been working actually on this topic for a very long time. I met her many years ago now when I was with the Fish and Wildlife Service. And at the time, she was already working on this topic. And she's contributed recently on the revision of the Penal Code in Vietnam, much of which has been a long time in coming and something that many people who've worked in this region have been looking forward to seeing changes for a while in order to make it more possible for us to go after folks who are conducting all kinds of wildlife crime. But today, especially for this crowd who are focused on avian species, I know a lot of us have many questions related to how that will be applied to birds, not only, songbirds, but also migratory birds, especially for this particular group. And so we will be getting into that a little bit more. And if you have any questions in particular about it, please feel free, again, like I said, to keep that in mind and type it in the chat, and then we can always address them during the question and answer period. And without further ado, I will kick it over to Ha and welcome her to our group. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Hi, everyone again, and good afternoon from Vietnam to those that I haven't said it yet. As I just quickly introduce myself. My name is Bui and Bui Thi Ha, and I'm the Director of Policy and Legislation at INVI. It is just my pleasure to be here and to share with the task force on Vietnam legislative effort in tackling wildlife trafficking in general. I think while the title is about legislative effort in general, and I would like to emphasize that in the past few years, I see that Vietnam has made a lot of effort, including a number of important legislative efforts to effectively combat illegal wildlife trafficking. But in these presentations, as introduced by Susan, I will focus on only on the new Penal Code, and we'll discuss its positive impact on the fight against wildlife trafficking in general. But you can definitely ask me any questions about its impact on illegal wildlife illegal trafficking of migratory and other birds. So feel free. Before going into detail about the topic, I should share my screen first. Susan just taught me through. I think I'm quite confident now. Can you see my screen okay?
Yeah, I can see.
Yes, we're good.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So before going into detail about the topic, I would like to give you a little bit background about INVI and what we are doing to combat illegal wildlife trade in Vietnam. And INVI was established 23 years ago in 2000 as one of the first non-governmental organizations focusing on wildlife and environment protection in Vietnam. And we first focused on training environmental educators in the buffer zone national parks throughout the country. And our aim is to get these environmental educators be educated so that they can educate others to protect wildlife. However, we soon realized that the major threat for wildlife protections is the illegal wildlife trafficking. And therefore, in 2005, we decided that we will focus entirely on combating illegal wildlife trafficking. And from time to time, of course, not overnight, we have developed a prolonged program that includes strengthening legislations and promoting prosecution of major wildlife traffickers, as well as strengthening law enforcement and reducing consumer demand for wildlife, mobilizing the public to protect wildlife as well. One quite unique feature of INVI work in Vietnam was our hotline. So this is the hotline that anyone, if you see a wildlife crime, you can call to the hotline and we will coordinate with authorities to respond to the crime and report back the result to the members of the public. by creating a transparent pattern for the public to report wildlife crime, we do not only have to improve the performance of authorities in dealing with publicly reported wildlife crime, but also have to increase the trust from the public in the system. And in 2005, when we created the hotline, we rarely receive any phone call to the hotline, but now on a daily basis, we receive about 9 new cases, 9 new cases from the public. Together with the hotline, we also created a wildlife crime database in 2005, which now recorded more than 28,000 wildlife crime cases, where we track the cases from the beginning until the conclusion. And not only the cases that happen in Vietnam, but we also track wildlife crime cases happen elsewhere if Vietnamese were involved. So by working closely with the authorities and through the hotlines, through the operations of the database, we can see the trend of what is going on with wildlife trafficking in Vietnam. We can also see the effort made by law enforcement agency, as well as the justice system. And also we can decide on the intervention needed, including recommendations for law changes or guidance to law enforcement agency where needed. So to put you in a context, Vietnam was allegedly a consumer country for wildlife. Not only that, Vietnam has also been considered a major transit route for wildlife trafficking in the region. According to our source, there are as many as 25 Vietnamese-led networks that operating all over Africa, sourcing, packing ivory, rhino horn, and pangolin scale, and shipping them on to Vietnam by either air freight, a mule carrying out, or shipping in tons of ivory and pangolin scales through seaports. Just from 2018 until now, more than 25 tons of ivory, 47 tons of pangolin scales were confiscated in Vietnam. The number will be much bigger if you count the seizure that happened elsewhere, that the shipment are on the way to Vietnam. And just earlier this year, Hải Phòng Port Authority seized more than 7 tons of ivory. Prior to that, in 2021 and 2022, authorities in Da Nang, a central province of Vietnam, also seized 138 kilograms of rhino horn, 3 tons of lion bone, 6.2 tons of pangolin scale, and a half tons of ivory from South Africa. Even during COVID time, we still recorded a number of cases involving rhino horn being transported by mules returning from repatriation flights. And they are just the one that get caught. The real volume may be much larger. Aside from these notable seizures, I also want to provide you with a more detailed pictures of what is going on with wildlife trafficking in Vietnam by giving you some numbers from our database. Here is the number in the past 5 years recorded in INVI database alone, and we basically recorded more than 30,700 wildlife crime cases, consisted of nearly 37 violations. And you will see from the percentage here that more than 66% of these crimes are advertising and selling, which I can say most of them are now found on the internet, and many of the migratory bird and other songbird have been advertised online. Now, possession of wildlife is also accounted for 27% of the crime, as you can see here, given the traditions of keeping wildlife as pets, especially songbird, many Vietnamese. So as you can see here, smuggling and trade only account for 7% of those recorded in INVI database, while the numbers of these cases is small. These cases are those more important and serious cases. That's some example I already brought up to you earlier. And so for these cases, we all aim for successful prosecution and convictions of relevant subjects. So with that background of what is going on in Vietnam, I think I will give a little bit more detail because we're talking about the legislative effort now. So I'm going a little bit more into the procedure for legislations to be developed in Vietnam, so that you know how we work, how we have to develop or revise the law here in Vietnam. So the procedure I show here is basically applied for any legislations either being developed or revised. However, the authorities for issuance, or in other words, like who can introduce the different degree of legislations, like such as law, decree, circular, will be very different. And in that sense, this presented here is the authorities in producing, revising the law, not other legislations like decree or circular. So you can see it basically all started with a legislation being put in a legislative development plan. Of course, it's after being proposed by relevant party and got approval from the National Assembly. So in order to get the approval from the National Assembly to develop a law or to put it in a development plan, it's important to note that you have to conduct a comprehensive analysis of the overall legislative framework, as well as the implementations of the law prior to the issuance. So it is only applied in case of revision or replacement of the law that you need to have that analysis on implementation. And this comprehensive analysis will be conducted at the legal basis, so that you can propose for the law to be developed. And after that, once the law is in the plan, it will be delegated to a ministry to draft the law, to work on the draft. And this ministry will have to coordinate and invite participants from other ministry to join the drafting board and working on the draft, which will then be discussed multiple times, of course, got public opinions before it is submitted to the government, which will then be submitted to the National Assembly Standing Committee for opinion. So we have the Standing Committee, which is the committees will work between different Congress meetings of the National Assembly. And the final step will be for the draft to be submitted to the National Assembly for comments, for revisions needed, and finally being approved and introduced by the National Assembly. So basically, this is how law are being developed here in Vietnam. So now I will go directly to the Penal Code. And to talk about the Penal Code, I will say the Penal Code is not the only law to punish violations or crimes relating to wildlife. So in Vietnam, we have different punishment levels to deal with wildlife crime, and similar to other type of crime as well. So we have the administrative punishment, which will be regulated under different administrative decree, and the criminal punishment, which is regulated under the Penal Code. So the procedure for the two types of legal proceedings, of course, are different, and only under the Penal Code that we can apply imprisonment sentence for relevant criminals. Of course, like as you may know, so in the criminal law proceeding, the result can also be the monetary fine, as you can see from the example that I'm showing here. And this is the old Penal Code. So please bear with me when I say the old Penal Code or the new Penal Code, because I want to show you what it looked like prior to the new Penal Code. So this is the old Penal Code, and it was first introduced in 1999. So 10 years before the revision in 2029. And as you can see from the language of the code, it sounds pretty basic for me. So basically a person like who illegally hunt, catch, slaughter, transport, or keep animals and of live animal only. I will get deeper into this later on. But if you hunt, catch, kill, transport, keep, or trade in the animals, that listed under the braces, rare wild animal prioritized for protection, or you transport, you trade the products of these animals, you can be sentenced up to 7 years in prison. I think I already highlighted here some of our concern for this article of the Penal Code on wildlife crime. And so, first of all, as you can see, only if you hunt, you catch, you kill, you transport, or you keep animal products, part of the animal, in the list of animals prioritized for protections, that you will receive a criminal punishment under the Penal Code. Not to mention that the list of precious, rare, wildlife prioritized for protections were only introduced in 2014, 5 years after the code came into force, and only included wildlife that are native to Vietnam. But the language means that you can harm tons of other wildlife that are not listed under the prioritized list, and will not face any administrative punishment, and we will not face any criminal punishment. You can only face administrative punishment. So many, I can tell you, in the list of the species prioritized for protection, there are just small number of bird species in there. So also with the regulations and given actually, like for this, like we also have the problems, as you can see here, like ivory, rhino horn, because they are not from species prioritized for protections in Vietnam. We have a little bit of difficulty in dealing with crimes related to those. And so for that, we had come up with the solutions and recommended to the government to use other articles of the Penal Code relating to the banned good or prohibited good to deal with these type of ivory and rhino horn crimes that I mentioned earlier. So, but anyway, I won't mention it in detail here. So aside from that, like as I already briefly mentioned to you, keeping live animal is another issue. Even though I have to say this is also a development of the old Penal Code in 2009 compared to the previous version in 1999, because in the 1999 versions there, which I didn't really show here, you basically can keep a live tiger at home illegally and face no prosecution, even if a tiger is listed under the highest protection level at the time. So going back to this Penal Code in 2029, now you will be prosecuted only if you keep a live tiger. So if you are keeping a dead tiger or their part or products, even skeleton tiger trophy, it will only be an administrative punishment, not a criminal offense. And you can see the inconsistency here, right? So, well, if I get a tiger, I should get it killed first, and then I don't have to face any prosecution. So the punishment here, as you can see, is up to 7 years in prison. Making wildlife crime a serious crime in Vietnam is ranked the second out of 4 degree of seriousness of crimes according to the system. So we have minor crime, we have serious crime, we have very serious crime, and then we have the particularly serious crime in the system. And wildlife crime is serious crime according to the Penal Code in 29 and also in 1999. So 7 years in prison. So for some people, they will say like 7 years is a good deterrent. But for me, to be honest, like I think that the maximum penalties, if 7 years is not good enough, and we aim for better, for higher, so that we have better deterrent value here. Also, in the old Penal Code, you can see the last sentence that had been highlighted. So this is the second punishment bracket of the old Penal Code. And if your crime is conducted in one of the manners that mentioned in the second punishment bracket, you will face more severe punishment compared to what you did in the first punishment bracket. However, as you can see, very serious or particularly serious consequences. How can you define what is serious, what is particularly serious? And so there were once the guidance for the problems, which I would say were not that comprehensive, but at least it helped at the time. However, that guidance was no longer valid with the revision of the code in 29, as well as the introductions of the list of wildlife priority type for protections, which not includes the animals listed before. So it's create like problems for people on how to define these. So to summarize, you can see the concern for the Penal Code in 29 is that we have the criminal procedure for crimes against only a limited number of wildlife species. So only species prioritized for protections that only crimes relating to them can get criminal punishment. Other than that, it's just administrative punishment or even no violation. The second one, maximum penalty, only 7 years. Not good as a deterrent, in my opinion. The next one, possession of wildlife, is not a crime unless you keep a live animal. And the last one, we see unclear regulations on what is defined as very serious or particularly serious consequences. And so I think like we all see the problems of the old Penal Code when we read it and through the implementations of the Penal Code, or at least we can see a part of it. And I believe that all the policy makers also see the same thing. So what is the driving force? So that after 10 years, after 16 years of implementations of the Penal Code, since it were introduced in 1999, that the major changes are coming with the new Penal Code that I will gonna introduce to you later. I think the main driving force here for those important updates on wildlife crimes of the new Penal Code is willingness from the government. And I think it came quite naturally as soon as the government realized our role, Vietnam's role in the illegal wildlife trafficking network, as well as we can see the severe negative impact of the trade on the image of Vietnam. I think at that time, through many CITES court, Vietnam had been in a hot spot for criticism on our actions to combat the illegal wildlife trafficking. So I still remember at the time. But anyway, so the government see all of these and also see the impact on the economy, on the cooperative relations with other countries as well. And I think this is why they decided to make the tremendous change in the new Penal Code that help to better combat wildlife trafficking. I will say that while there is no perfect law in reality in any country, I think, and also in Vietnam, I believe that the relevant articles of the new Penal Code on wildlife had helped to address most critical issues that we face prior to the issuing of the new law. So as you can see here, competitions, maximum penalty now have been raised to 15 years in prison, making wildlife crime become the very serious crime compared to being serious crime in the past. Possessions, either death, a live part products of wildlife is a criminal offense under the new penal code. I didn't really put it in the presentation, but aside from having separate provisions to deal with rhino horn or ivory crime, which is like an important issue for Vietnam to address at the time, the new penal code also have clear guidance on how to deal with crimes involving different species. So let's talk about bird. So for bird species that are native to Vietnam and are listed under the prioritized list, so if you possess one bird listed in that category, you face prosecution. So for those species that listed under CITES Appendix 1 that are not native in Vietnam or under 1B group in Vietnam, so which is the protection level just lower than the prioritized list, the prioritized wildlife for protection list. And for that, you will need to have 7 birds to be prosecuted. So you need to hunt, you need to trade, you need to transport, you need to kill 7 birds to be prosecuted. And other than that, you will face other than that, to that category of bird, you will face administrative punishment. And for birds that inside this Appendix 2 or in Group 2B of Vietnam law, which is the lower level than the 1B group, so it will depend. It depends on the monetary value of the bird. That if the monetary value of the bird is more than 150 million Vietnam dong, which is I think equal to, oh my God, I'm not good at math, so I'm not trying to do math here, but basically to a certain monetary value, then it will be criminal offense, and under that it will be administrative punishment. And this also applies for other like I would say not no name but common bird, other common bird as well. Common bird and bird listed under under CITES Appendix 3, they will also can be violations relating to them can also be prosecuted under the penal code if the confiscated animals evaluated at a certain amount that meet the requirement under the penal code. So basically, we have the new penal code that help to address all types of crimes. And as I mentioned here, we have punishment for crimes related to wildlife with a lower level of protections, as you can see. So here is some article of the penal code. Article 244 is still the main article. I would say it is an inheritance and improvement from the Article 190 of the old penal code that I showed you earlier. And this is to deal with the most critical and endangered wildlife protected in Vietnam and under CITES. Ivory, rhino horn are also crimes are also clearly regulated there. And like I mentioned earlier, which I explained about the bird, in this article, the quantity of the confiscated animals or the weight of the confiscated ivory or rhino horn will be used to determine the punishment bracket. And to deal with the crime related to wildlife with lower level of protection, we have the Article 234, which use the monetary value of wildlife to decide the punishment bracket and divide the distinction between the administrative punishment and criminal punishment for crime involving these animals. And aside from these articles, that we continue to use other articles of the penal code, including the one applied for prohibited goods to deal with specific crimes involving products of certain wildlife species, such as penguin scale of those that listed under CITES Appendix 1, because we still have small problems that these crimes were not regulated under either Article 244 or Article 234. So with all the development what I show in you here is the application. And I can say that Susan already mentioned a little bit that I met her long ago. And with my 10-year experience tracking criminal cases in Vietnam, I can definitely see a positive trend in dealing with the most important wildlife crime cases, thanks to the introductions of the new Penal Code in 2015, and it actually came into force in 2018. So from this graph, you can see the number of criminal cases recorded from time to time continue to be higher. And by the way, they are on the criminal cases that recorded in the wildlife crime database. So the real number may be higher. But with this, even with this number, you can see it's an indicator. You can see it's an indicator of more crimes being discovered, or it can also be an indicator of better record in our database. And so I couldn't comment on the increasing numbers of criminal cases recorded from time to time. However, what I can say is that we see a higher arrest rate and a prosecution rate after the Penal Code came into force in 2018. So over the 5-year period since the revised Penal Code, the new Penal Code came into force, arrests had increased from 84.6% for the period in 2014 and 2017 to 92.2% for the periods from 2018 to 2022. So in the 4-year following the revision of the Penal Code, I say 4-year because before that we also have a 4-year. So in 2018 to 2021, you can see on an average 88% cases with arrest will also result in prosecution of one or more subjects. So conversely, this average across the 4-year preceding the Penal Code was only 92%. So the percentage of convictions resulted in prison sentence in 2022, just last year, as I'm showing you here, and also you can see the trend that happened actually since 2018 here. In 2022, the percentage of convictions resulting in prison sentence was 47.5%, and it's higher than the 45% since the revised Penal Code came into force. As you can see, the average prison sentence for wildlife criminals in 2022 was 3 years, more than 2 years in prison. And you will say that if you look at it from 2018 to now, you will see a slight downward average sentence from 4.4 years in prison in 2019. However, if you look at it, the average prison sentence, if you look at the percentage, I mean like the average prison sentence in 2017, 1 year before the revised Penal Code, you will see that the average prison sentence in 2022 even lower than the 2019, but still like twice higher than the 1.2 years average recorded before the revised Penal Code. So this is what we can see, and more than that, 14 years is the highest punishment ever for wildlife criminals here in Vietnam. And this was sent down to a subject who was involved in the trafficking of more than 120 kilograms of rhino horns through the Nội Bài airport. And this guy was first convicted by the Hanoi court and will later appeal, but the higher court decided to keep the sentence the same to show, and this is the milestone showing the progress in Vietnam and the determinations of the justice system in combating the illegal wildlife trade. And not only this guy, we have a number of important wildlife traffickers that have been sentenced to prison. And so 10 year, 11 year in prison is no longer something that we don't see. Now we see quite often people are being sentenced to prisons for more than 10 years since the enactment of the new penal code, and many of them are the important wildlife traffickers, which I will have here some example. And this follows is very interesting because I can show you the sentencing before and after the penal code. The 4 subjects were all considered kingpin in wildlife trafficking: one on marine turtles, one on ivory, rhino horn pangolin scale, one quite specific on the distribution of ivory in Vietnam, and one on tiger trafficking. And the 2 first kingpins in the left-hand side were prosecuted and punished under the old penal code, while the 2 latter were convicted under the new penal code. And you can see the difference in punishment. 10 tons of marine turtles, like thousands of turtles being killed. And he only served 4 years and 6 months in prison. And I will tell you that in this case, this is the determinations of the justice system that he got that sentence. Without that, he can even got a lighter punishment. And Nguyễn Mậu Chiến is allegedly behind the network who traffic tons of ivory, rhino horn pangolin scale from Africa to Vietnam, and he only received 23 months in prison due to the old penal code. And this is after a number of interventions that ENP had made working with other justice partners since his first sentence of only 18 months in prison. So a lot of work had been done there in order for him to get 23 months under the old penal code. But for the 2 laters who were charged under the new penal code, we can see a quite different picture. Despite all of the mitigating circumstances that they can come up with, Nam still served 8 years in prison for transporting 200 kilograms of ivory, and where he got 6 years for the 7 frozen tiger cub that he may traffic from Laos. So I also have here some background on Nam and Hue, but I don't think we have a lot of time for that. So I think I can come to a conclusion here that after 5 years of the new penal code come into effect, I think we can report on a quite positive trend. As law enforcement agency, we can see they are taking more serious stance in addressing wildlife crime, and more courts have adopted a much stricter approach toward deterring wildlife crime by issuing longer prison sentences to subjects convicted of serious wildlife crime, thanks to the penal code, of course. But I don't think that we should be satisfied with what we have here in Vietnam. I believe that there must be continued effort to use the laws effectively to handle wildlife crimes, especially to use the law not only the article relating to wildlife trafficking, but also other articles of the penal code on money laundering, on others organized crime, for example, to trace after the most important criminals who are behind tons of ivory, rhino horn, pangolin scale shipment into Vietnam, which is like one of the most, the biggest issue, the biggest challenges that we are dealing in Vietnam at the moment. So with that note, I think I will end my presentation here, and thank you very much for your attention. I hope the internet wasn't broken when I'm talking, and I'm very much looking forward to your comments, to your questions, especially those relating to bird, because I don't think I address it a lot in my presentation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ha. I think that was a really good way to introduce what has been going on with the Penal Code. I would like to open the floor to anybody who has any other questions. You can raise your hand or you can type it in the chat. I think the first question that I had actually was, when you address one of the major issues is having these species actually listed as priority species to be considered under that kind of protection. And CITES is often used as a guideline right now in Vietnam. So, in the context of having these multilateral agreements as a guide, how likely could it be that CMS and the appendices in CMS could also be used as a guide? Because I know a lot more bird species are listed, for instance, under CMS that are not listed under CITES necessarily. And so if it is a way to get more attention from the government to have that as a priority species, what is the approach to convince them to do that?
So thank you very much for your question, Susan. So basically, like in Vietnam, I think the policymaker, I'm just thinking from this from my side, at the policymaker, they usually they want something like binding upon to use as a guidance, like for them to produce the list that will be protected in Vietnam. So I'm not sure the CMS list, and I don't think it has been binding upon yet. So I don't think like it can be used widely by the government in producing the list of species prioritized for protection here. However, I think like one other approach that you can do is to contact with scientists in Vietnam. So in Vietnam, we have a number of scientific authorities, and often when the government produce the law, especially when it comes to species lists, they will come to get opinions from the scientific communities, which mostly these scientific authorities. And so they will ask for opinions from these, and if the scientist communities or the scientific authorities, they can provide the background background of the threat to the wildlife, especially the migratory bird. Then definitely they, if you have an argument and you can and you have good argument for that, I definitely think the government will take into considerations to uplift a certain bird species.
How often do they update the list right now? Is it just an open solicitation for information, or is it like once a year they do a review, or once every few years they do a review for adding more species?
So as a background as well, so the Penal Code, they only regulate the punishment for violations relating to the wildlife. However, the list of wildlife is not listed under either the Penal Code or any other law. They are listed under decree, and these decrees are usually either produced in terms of drafting board. They, of course, they will be approved and introduced by the government. For the decree, the government will be the authority agency to release them. But it's all started with the ministry like either Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development in Vietnam, or MONRE, Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment in Vietnam. And so it depends, but usually it will be a few years. So like, for example, the list according to the decrees that was drafted by March, it was 5 years, or in necessary occasions that they may do it quicker, but usually it will be 5 years. But I can tell you, like the Decree 06, which is included on the list of the endangered species, which is drafted by March, is under revision for now. So any recommendations should be made to the scientific communities at the moment.
Got it.
In order to make it to the new law.
Well, thank you very much. There's a few questions in chat. So Vicky says, great talk, great progress, which is brilliant to see. I'm wondering what the situation is with possession of equipment related to illegal wildlife crime, for example, for birds, nets, traps, guns, poisons, etc.
So so basically, how to say, we have different law to we have different regulations of the penal code as well to deal with the possessions of guns. Guns and others dangerous, what we say, weapons in Vietnam. So basically, a normal person in Vietnam cannot have weapons. So for that, we will have different article of the penal code to deal with the crimes. However, for other type of possessions of other type of equipments, like bird net, like trap, to be honest, like this is what the loophole in the current legislative structures, because we don't have the crime to we don't have the don't have the legislation to deal with crimes relating to possession of these. If you bring the trap, if you bring the net into the national park, yeah, that will be an administrative punishment, and we have the administrative law to deal with the issue. But if you have it at the possessions, and in Vietnam, I can see that many people they create the equipment like from the very commonly used tools around them. Like they can use what in the bicycle, I couldn't remember, but they can use like many different things to create the equipments for illegal wildlife hunting. And for those, like we still don't have we don't have the regulations to address that crime yet.
Another
Very
question.
unfortunate. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something that everybody in the region is working on, trying to make laws to work about nets and things like that too.
You know what? One of the things that we are working on actually right now, possession may be hard, but at least I can tell you weapon is not allowed here. So possession of other equipment is quite hard to deal with. But we are also working with the Ministry of Public Security at the moment to recommend them to deal with the advertisement. So advertising for sale of this equipment online and offline as well. So we are working with the Ministry of Public Security, and hopefully at least like they show their consensus initially. So we will see what is going on, and I will definitely give you an update. But at least for now, is this an issue?
Yeah, in a lot of countries, they have permitting processes related to having things like mist nets or other nets, for instance, that, only researchers can get it and people can't necessarily get it if they're just like a regular person. So it doesn't make it so easy for them to catch things like that. So I think that kind of takes time to make a system like that. So yeah, it's good to see that it's moving in that direction. Another question from the crowd. Swapna asks, I would like to know what are or is there any approaches attempted to change the bushmeat consumption status by local people?
I will tell you, like, if you you already see the content of the penal code, and the administrative law is also like in that similar approaches. So basically, like for bushmeat consumptions, even by local people or by anyone, it can be either like this is a crime if there's no legal origins of the animals. So in Vietnam, you will have the animals that are fully protected, tiger, bear, marine turtles, you name it. There are some bird species as well, hornbill, So for these species, they are prohibited for consumptions for anything, for use in any way. If they are a wild source. So for those other animals, you can actually consume this animal, or you can use the animal, or you can have the animal if you have the paperwork showing legal origin of these animals. So and other than that, if you don't have the legal papers, or if you consume the prohibited animals, then it will be either a criminal offense or administrative punishment, depending on the serious need of the crime, the species, the monetary value of the animals in case of those receive lower level of protection. So basically, I think to answer your questions, I think they already have the legislations in Vietnam already allow us to address crime relating to consumptions of wildlife and bushmeat. So it's only come to applications of the law and how to deal with the issue. And the fact is that like many law enforcement agencies, like they only consider a crime when they see they are either transporting, they are hunting, or they are selling the animals. They don't see that possession, they don't see that consumption is also a crime that are punishable under the law. And so that is the problem that needs to be addressed more than because the legislative framework we see, I think is good enough.
Okay, so our next comment and question from the chat, it's from Siva from Malaysia. Great presentation, Ms. Bui. Amazing effort by the Vietnamese authorities to strengthen legislation arresting poaching syndicates. Vietnam, like Malaysia, where I come from, has a challenging task due to long land and maritime borders. Vietnam probably has 4,000 to 5,000 full-time rangers, government, NGOs, community rangers to patrol and enforce the law widely at wildlife habitats, borders, coastal areas, and hotspots. Any attempts to strengthen the field staff capacity and strength to enforce the new law? Vietnam's efforts will greatly assist other Southeast Asian countries. And actually related to that, Clary's question in her comment also has to deal with the staff capacity for law enforcement. Clary also is asking, I was wondering if the law provides enforcers with sufficient support to use investigation methods used in other crimes for wildlife crimes too, such as forensic science, telecommunications, etc. And also that what you said about linking the other legislation of organized crime and money laundering is very important as well. So yeah, what if you would like to speak more to some of these capacity building efforts for wildlife crimes? I think that'd be very informative for people. And I also want to add a few words about that. More Efficient Wildlife has been helping with as well with that, and USAID after. But yeah, Ha, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think like Susan, you can definitely add it more. But I think like there is a lot of efforts, not only from the government, but also like from the NGO communities and from other partners in helping to build capacity of law enforcement agency in dealing with wildlife crime in Vietnam. Like for INVI, for example, like we don't do. We know that many other organizations also doing workshop, doing also training, different types of training provided to law enforcement agency and also the justice system in how to effectively apply the penal code. For us, like we will produce like different kind of guidance like on how to understand the law and how to apply the law correctly. For example, just because like sometimes you may be the judge, you may be the prosecutor, and you may be very familiar with the procedure, proceedings, regulations, but you may not be familiar with wildlife protections legislations, especially like when it had been revised quite often and quite complicated with many different level of protections for this wildlife. So for INVI, like we will provide guidance. We provide certain alert, like when new law comes, we will just like analyze what is in the new law, how can they understand the law, and how for them to apply it correctly. And our day-to-day work with the law enforcement agency on specific cases will also we will also help them through that way. So Susan, add more of the
I think ENV serves a very important role in advising law enforcement and how to apply things. And like you mentioned before, with working with places like the Attorney General Office or other prosecutors and law enforcement understand the laws that are being made are very important. But in terms of like actual field staff training, a lot of times other NGOs and other multilateral funded projects from other organizations like U.S. Fish and Wildlife and USAID work with local NGOs and other NGOs besides ENV to train staff on a government level and also on a community level to form patrols and also learn how to do wildlife forensics so that they can actually collect evidence in a way that actually follows a proper chain of custody and also in a way that's admissible in court, for instance. And that's something that there are many other organizations that are working on, though it is slow because obviously the country is very big and there's a lot of places where there are key points. But I know a lot of those efforts, that are being worked on are very much multilateral. So they work very closely between not only the Vietnamese law enforcement, but also with Thai law enforcement, so that they can catch criminals who are transporting them across borders, for instance. And those cases are also very much a large part of the work that's being done in this landscape, where EMV is providing a lot of support on the Vietnamese side for people to understand that, yes, these are actually crimes. So you actually do have to do this, this, and this to go after them. So they do serve a very important role to support law enforcement in that sense, and not just training field staff and focusing more on the practical law enforcement that's done on the ground for those. But yeah. Another question from the crowd. Yvonne says, my question is around neighboring countries and whether Vietnam's experiences having impact on their own situation. So like how much, what's going on with Vietnam is impacting everybody else also around us, like, Thailand, Cambodia, China, other places. And if the changes in the penal code have impacted and changed what's going on in any of the other neighboring countries, for instance.
Well, I would say that with the great enforcement of the new penal code in Vietnam, the trafficker may use your country to traffic wildlife rather than going through Vietnam. We no longer a transit route for wildlife trafficking. I'm just kidding. So to be honest, like I haven't. The thing is that like why we have to see that wildlife trafficking is a lucrative, very profitable, like business, and so the law is good, but only, and we just started to see the progress. We started to see the enforcement of the new penal code in the last 5 years, and I think like there will be more time. We need more time to really see the impact of the penal code on our own situations and on others and neighboring countries as well. So I don't think we can say anything for now.
I do think that that's also a very important point, though, that there's definitely a push for more multilateral work that is slowly coming out of now that there is a new penal code, that everybody knows how it works now and how they can then apply it with their country. So yeah, I think that is a work in progress. Another question from Vicky. I'm interested to know if you feel attitudes are changing towards consumption/trade in wildlife among younger generations in Vietnam, and whether efforts are still being made on education.
Well, definitely. So as you can see from EAAFP work, we are not only supporting strength and enforcement or legislative development. We also work a lot with the public, and we try not only to reduce consumer demand for wildlife, but also we also mobilize the public participations in wildlife protections. And one indicator I can tell to see that we see a difference in attitude in wildlife consumptions is the number of hotline call to the number of hotline call. And you can see like in the past, like not many people interested in wildlife protections, and they just like they may be also the user. But now like we receive 9 new cases every day and hundreds of phone calls every day from the member of the public. It shows that because they must be committed, they must not use wildlife in order for them to report wildlife crimes. So we see this is one indicator showing the change, and most of those who reported are the younger generations as well. And we also see the participation of these younger generations in our work. These are our eyes and ears on the ground. So in Vietnam we have 63 provinces, and EAAFP is only based in Hanoi. So our volunteer, we have 9 clubs around the country, and we have more than 1,000 active volunteer in 59 provinces of Vietnam, whose, like I mentioned, eyes and ears on the ground help us to educate other people about wildlife protections, also help us to monitor wildlife crimes. One is have been addressed by law enforcement agency, like to ensure the trust, So their participation shows that we do see the changes. We do see a better younger generations that will not consume wildlife. However, it takes time. It's still and I think like there are not only EAAFP but many others organizations also working on educations But for ENV, like we are more focused on education, of course, of the young generation, but we focus on those who can take actions right away. But I don't also see other efforts that are working on other generation, even younger generations as well. And I think it what it is we see the change. We see the change in attitude, and we see a better generation that will not consume wildlife.
Okay. Ha, do you mind if you stop sharing your screen? Just so we can get ready to wrap up also. If
Thank you.
Yeah, if anybody has any other questions, what I think, you know, Yvonne's point about you know, how this is very much there's a multilateral aspect to this, you know, there's a lot of international collaboration that's very much needed. What do you think is something that for our task force, like what should we actually focus on doing to help increase the impact of the type of work that, you know, ENV has started, and also just in general to address wildlife crime in the region that will help increase international collaboration and increase more cooperation between different countries to address this issue for, you know, not just native Vietnamese animals, but also with Vietnam as a transit country that has been a big issue before?
I think like the task force can definitely be a platform for the, like, for example, for this today's seminar is also a way for us to share the experience that we have in Vietnam, so that others colleagues here can also, you know, like see whether you can use anything or you can apply anything, or, you know, like in their own country. So this is one of the way. And I also think that the task force will be one important force to encourage the government of Vietnam to take more, or, you know, the government of the other country to take more actions to address the issue. In terms of migratory bird, I have to say that I do see an attention from the government on the issue. As you may already know, in last year, in the May last year, the Prime Minister of Vietnam issued a directive specifically to address wild bird crimes that he required the enforce. Of course, that directive is not a law. So it is more like a emphasis with the law that we have, but encourage law enforcement and request law enforcement agency to deal with wild bird crime more seriously. And so, like, I think like this shows that the Vietnamese government have the interest in the issue, and with the CMS, you know, voice for the to the governments, I definitely see that there will be more attention, and the issue will be taken more seriously in the upcoming time.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. It's very encouraging to see these changes happening in Vietnam. We have a lot of colleagues who are in the audience today from other parts of Southeast Asia who are also hoping to see these changes in their own governments and legislation. So I think it's very encouraging to see that it's a positive change that happens after the Penal Code has been updated. And it'll hopefully be encouraging to others working in this region on the issue to also adopt some of these changes that I know a lot of people have been pushing for many years now. Yvonne or Tillman, would you like to make any closing statements before we wrap everything up?
Thanks, Susan, and good morning here in this part of the world to everybody, and good afternoon. So for those of you who do not know me, my name is Ivan Ramirez. I am the head of the AVIAN team, and I just wanted to say thank you so much to our presenter, Mrs. Bui, because it's been incredibly useful to hear from the experience in Vietnam. And also, I just wanted to pick up on the last part of this discussion, you know, on the role of this task force and how we can make sure that, you know, experiences like these ones are shared and also learned from neighboring countries and from stakeholders in the region and beyond. I can really see that, you know, similar initiatives could be developed in other countries, and the CMS task force, with the support of our members and our partners and our parties, is trying to expand this. So just, you know, highlighting that whenever any of the participants of today's webinar feel that there is a niche or there is a need for us to work through Susan with you on particular topics, or to discuss these issues. We are more than happy to organize another webinar or any other meetings in Vietnam and in other countries. Of course, this is what it's all about. It's about sharing experiences and trying to understand how best do we tackle the threat of wildlife crime, and specifically with migratory birds in the region. So just wanted to say thank you, and that we are really, really open to continue working with you on this topic. We will probably soon upload the recording of this into our website, and I am sure that it will be received with great interest. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much again, Ha, and thank you everybody for coming. I'm going to hit stop recording now.